If you've ever walked into a coffee shop in Amsterdam, there is one name you've almost definitely seen on the menu: White Widow. This legendary cannabis strain became the face of Dutch weed. For decades, it has been the thing tourists fly halfway across the world to try. The strain basically screams Amsterdam. But here's what's wild about it. To this day, nobody can fully agree on who actually created it. But before we get into White Widow, you have to understand the city it came from. Way back in 1972, a man named Wernard Bruining opened the very first coffee shop, called Mellow Yellow, inside an old squatted bakery. Then, in 1976, the Dutch government did something almost no other country on earth would touch. They passed gedoogbeleid, the Dutch tolerance policy, that basically decriminalized small amounts of cannabis. That change let these coffee shops sell weed right out in the open. By the 1990s, Amsterdam had hundreds of them. The Dutch had also started to become the genetics capital of the weed world, with seed banks pumping out strain after strain. And in 1988, High Times brought its Cannabis Cup to the city, turning Amsterdam into the official world championship of weed every single year. So the stage was already set, but the one thing the city did not have yet was a single strain to become its mascot. And in the mid-1990s, it finally got one: White Widow. White Widow was unlike anything else on those menus at the time. While most of the weed back then was the classic skunk and haze that everybody already knew, White Widow showed up looking like it had been rolled in sugar, completely buried under white crystal resin. That frosty look is exactly how it got its name. But it did not just look different. It came from somewhere completely different too. It is a cross between a sativa from Brazil's Santa Marta region and a super resinous indica from the mountains of Kerala, India. Two plants from opposite sides of the planet brought together into one. The high is what really made people fall for it though. A fast, euphoric head rush that slowly melts down into a relaxed body buzz, with the THC landing somewhere in the high teens to the low 20s. The resin-heavy terpene profile gives it that earthy, woody base, while caryophyllene adds the signature peppery kick on the way out. It was potent, it was beautiful, and it was brand new. And in 1995, it proved exactly how special it was. White Widow entered the High Times Cannabis Cup, and it won. Almost overnight, White Widow became the strain everybody in Amsterdam wanted. Every coffee shop had to have it on the menu, and every other breeder in the city started chasing that frosty look, trying to make their own weed as crystal-covered as the Widow. Tourists began asking for it by name. It turned into the strain you smoked to prove you had really been to Amsterdam. White Widow was not just popular at that point, it had become the symbol of the entire city's weed scene. But here's where the story gets messy, because for a strain this famous, you'd think we'd know exactly who made it, but we don't. There are basically two men who claim it. The first is an Australian breeder named Scott Blakey, who most people know by his nickname Shanti Baba. He says he spent years traveling through Asia and South America collecting landrace plants, working alongside Neville Schoenmakers, the man High Times once called the original king of cannabis. Shanti Baba claims he bred White Widow and entered it into that 1995 cup. That same team would later go on to create the Super Silver Haze strain, which won 3 Cannabis Cups in a row. Shanti Baba later partnered with Howard Marks to found Mr. Nice Seed Bank, where he still sells the original genetics today, just under the name Black Widow. The other claim comes from a quiet Dutch grower known only as Ingemar, who says he actually stabilized the strain years earlier and then handed it off. And right in the middle of all of this is Arjan Roscom, the founder of the Greenhouse Seed Company, and the man who marketed White Widow to the entire world. He doesn't back the Australian at all. He backs Ingemar. So, depending on who you ask, White Widow was either created by a globe-trekking Australian or a secretive Dutchman. But the one thing that everybody does agree on is that it walked out of that 1995 Cup an absolute legend. And a legend is exactly what it stayed. Way beyond Amsterdam, White Widow grew into one of the most recognized weed names on the entire planet, right up there with names like Skunk and Northern Lights. It got name-dropped in TV shows and rap songs, printed on t-shirts, and it became the blueprint for a whole new family of strains. Breeders crossed it into everything, giving us White Rhino, White Russian, Great White Shark, Blue Widow, and a ton more, to the point where white basically became its own category of weed, the same way Kush and Haze did. And almost 30 years later, it's still here, still sitting on coffee shop menus all over Amsterdam, still being grown around the world. Most strains get their moment and then quietly fade away. White Widow never did. So that frosty little bud you see on just about every Amsterdam menu isn't just another strain. It's a piece of cannabis history. The one that came to represent an entire city, born from two plants on opposite sides of the world and wrapped up in a mystery that's never been fully solved. Amsterdam was already the weed capital before it ever showed up. But White Widow is the strain that gave that capital its crown. So, what about you? Have you ever smoked White Widow or grabbed some on a trip to Amsterdam? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives like this one, and I will catch you all in the next one.